Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The sky over Yumoba spread out like a weary apron, faded, warm, and stained with the smoke of evening cooking fires. Beneath it, a narrow line of men shuffled in, some in corporate trousers, others in torn sandals, drawn not by the dusty road or the rusting signboard, but by the aroma rising from Clara's open-sided kitchen. They came every evening, not because it was the biggest eatery in town. It wasn't, but because Clara's hands made food that made men forget. Her kitchen had no tiled floor, just red sand neatly swept. No loud waiters, only Clara with a bright wrapper tied above her waist, her wrists moving like magic across the pots. She never measured her ingredients, yet each plate came out with balance, like a hymn. People said her agbono soup had soul, and her smoky jollof rice could bring a drunk back to his senses. Some customers said that food like Clara's couldn't come from a woman without secrets. But Clara had no time for gossip. Her life was heat, hunger, and hustle. What she didn't know, however, was that while her food was drawing smiles outside, the air in her home had grown stale and heavy, like stew left uncovered overnight. Toby used to be the first to stir her pot of dreams, back when Clara's kitchen was just a plank table in front of their compound, and all they had was a charcoal stove and hope. He'd help fan the fire, wipe down benches, even call out orders like a proud husband supporting his woman. But those days had gone quiet. These days, Toby would sit at the far end of the shop, jaw locked, eyes narrowed, arms folded across his chest like a watchman guarding a woman instead of loving her. He never smiled when she greeted customers, never joined in the laughter that often filled the space around Clara's pot. Instead, he observed, silent, wounded, and quick to snap. One day, when a young man in a fine shirt had told Clara, "You dey cook like say you dey blessed person spirit," Toby had stood up and barked, "Better mind yourself, you hear? She no dey sell herself here." The man blinked in shock. Clara apologized quickly, heart pounding. She tried to laugh it off with the customer, but her cheeks were burning with shame. When they got home that night, she tried to hold Toby, tried to remind him of who they used to be. But he shrugged off her hand like a coat he no longer wanted to wear. That night, they lay in silence, two bodies beneath the same roof, worlds apart. At first, Clara told herself it was just pressure. Maybe it was the way success was changing things. She was earning more, paying bills on time, and even saving to repaint the shop. Maybe Toby just felt left behind. So she adjusted. She made his bathwater warm before he returned from night shifts. She packed his lunch in airtight bowls. She even reduced how often she talked with male customers and told the apprentices to serve them instead. But Toby's suspicions thickened like badly cooked pap. He began checking her phone when she was in the bathroom. If she stayed long at the market, he would call repeatedly, asking, "Who are you with? Why is there noise in the background?" Sometimes, if he showed up at the shop and found her laughing, his face would tighten like a drum. One evening, he followed her to the back where she was washing stockfish and asked her coldly, "You think I don't see how that man always stays extra after eating? He likes you. Do you like him too?" Clara stared at him, soap suds on her fingers, water dripping from her arms, and she could only whisper, "Toby, I don't know what's happening to you anymore." But in truth, she did know. Something had shifted in his eyes, something she couldn't place. It wasn't just insecurity, it was distance, like he had gone somewhere without telling her. The bedroom was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cold room of forced silences and rehearsed affection. He would touch her sometimes, out of duty, or to reassure himself she still belonged to him, but it always felt like he was holding her hostage instead of holding her close. She began to dread those nights. Sometimes she'd pretend to be asleep, breathing softly with her back turned, praying he would roll over and not reach for her. And on the nights he did touch her, she let him, body stiff like a broomstick, eyes staring at the curtain fluttering in the breeze, counting each second till it ended. When he got up to wash himself, she would lie there quietly, feeling like something inside her had been scraped out. Still, she said nothing. Not to her friends, not even to her mother, who always called asking, "How's your marriage?" And Clara would always reply, "We're fine, Mama. Just busy." Because to admit otherwise was to open a wound she didn't know how to close. And so she poured her pain into pepper soup, hid her worry behind plantain chips, and masked her loneliness with laughter. But even the best cooked meat will one day reveal its bone. Clara's body had started to betray her before her mind caught up. First, it was the discomfort, subtle but lingering, something she waved off as exhaustion or maybe the side effect of long hours by the firewood, inhaling smoke and sweating under the sun. But then came the itch that crept on her in the middle of the night, the unusual heat between her legs that left her squirming on her side of the bed. She stopped bathing with her regular soap, thinking it was an allergic reaction. She soaked in hot water with salt. She applied creams and oils whispered from old women at the market. Yet the discomfort persisted like an unanswered prayer. Her spirit became uneasy. She watched herself more closely in the mirror each morning, watched her eyes for signs of illness, pressed her belly softly as though the pain might speak. One morning, she stayed home instead of going to the shop. She told Toby her head was pounding, and he barely nodded, more occupied with a phone call he walked out to receive in private. When the compound went quiet and the children were off to school, Clara tied her scarf low over her forehead, grabbed her hospital card, and took a tricycle to the clinic down by ODU Lane. She told the nurse, "It's probably nothing. I just want to be sure." The doctor, a soft-voiced man with kind eyes and a wedding band that looked older than his face, asked a few questions before gently collecting samples. Clara sat in the waiting room pressing her knees together, unable to shake the feeling that something in her life had tilted. When her name was called again, she walked into his office and noticed immediately the hesitation in his eyes. He cleared his throat, adjusted the paper on his table, and then looked up at her. "Mrs. Clara, your result shows you have chlamydia." The word didn't register at first. She blinked. "I don't understand," she said. "I've been married for years. I've only been with my husband." The doctor nodded slowly, compassion thick in his voice. "That's why it's important to have your partner tested too." Clara stood up as if something had physically pushed her off the chair. She walked home that day like a ghost, avoiding every familiar face. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. The world around her continued as usual, children running, women bargaining, motorbikes zooming past, but in her ears everything had gone silent. She knew her body, and she knew her truth. If an infection had found its way into her, it hadn't come through her own hands. Something, or rather someone, had let it in. That night, Clara told Toby she wasn't feeling strong. She didn't go into details. She said it like a whisper, almost like she was asking him for permission to stay broken. He shrugged and lay on his side, back facing her, and was asleep within minutes. She lay still beside him, her eyes wide open in the dark, the ceiling above her blurring. Every inhale of his breath felt like an insult, a mockery of the woman who had cooked his meals and washed his clothes without asking for more than his honesty. For 3 days, she pretended to be sicker than she truly felt. She groaned in the mornings and dragged her feet in the evenings. She held her stomach during meals and sipped only warm water with a forced grimace. Toby didn't ask questions. He simply stayed out longer, claimed he had night shifts, and returned with sweat on his brow and the faint scent of another perfume sometimes clinging to his shirt. Clara's soul began to pull away slowly, like meat slipping off bone. She didn't confront him. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of watching her rage or cry. Instead, she retreated, emotionally first, then physically. She slept in the children's room when she could, citing headaches or fear of infecting him with whatever she was battling. He barely resisted. He would grunt or wave a hand in acknowledgement, already halfway into sleep. The man who once couldn't fall asleep without her body pressed into his back now drifted off without even asking why she trembled in the night. Clara poured her unrest into the shop, staying longer each day, arriving earlier than the apprentices. She repainted the benches herself, added a new lantern, and started giving customers chilled sachet water for free. She told herself it was just a way to improve business, but she knew it was a shield, something to keep her from going home too early, from facing the man she no longer trusted. The kitchen became her church, the fire her altar. Her laughter at the shop returned, but it was calculated, never careless. She laughed with her eyes half open, watching corners. Her skin healed slowly under the medication, but her spirit remained raw. Still, she did not accuse Toby. Not yet. He had to hang himself with his own rope. And the more she watched, the clearer it became. His patterns, his absence, the extra money he suddenly claimed was from a friend's side job. She began to document everything in her head, dates, times, outfits. She kept receipts from nights she knew he didn't work. And then came the unexpected tip, the quiet revelation that would push everything into place. It didn't come with shouting or confrontation. It came on a quiet Wednesday when a familiar customer leaned across the table and said, "Madam Clara, I get something where you fit want no. But I no sabe how to talk unless you calm first." She looked up, the stirring spoon in her hand suspended. "Talk," she said, voice flat. The man nodded, cleared his throat, and began. By the time he finished, Clara's hands had gone still. Her heart beat steady, not because she was calm, but because she was preparing for war or freedom. She wasn't sure which yet. The air was unusually dry that afternoon, like something was waiting to happen. Clara had just finished serving okra soup to a group of bricklayers who teased her about her cooking being too sweet to be single when Yemi walked in. He wasn't her regular type of customer. He dressed clean, spoke gently, and always paid without asking for change. That day, he waited till the crowd thinned before calling her quietly. He didn't sit. He just stood by the doorway, arms crossed, eyes darting as though searching for the right moment. Clara walked over with her hands wiped clean on her apron, and he looked at her the way someone looks at a friend right before breaking news. "Madam," he began, "no vex. I don't dey reason this thing for weeks now. But I talk say I no go keep quiet again." Clara tilted her head slightly. "Talk." Yemi's voice dropped as he continued. "You sabi say I be manager for Maluga Hotel, Abi? That your husband dey come there steady. Sometimes twice in a week." He paused, scanning her face, unsure of whether to proceed. Clara didn't speak. Her silence pressed him forward. "He dey come with one small girl. Light skin, maybe 20 or so. I know one involved myself before, but last week she dey play with his ears for reception like say na film." Clara's face didn't twitch. She just nodded once, very slowly, like she was filing the information into a cabinet deep inside her. She didn't shout. She didn't ask for proof. She only said, "Next time he enter, tell me. I go come see him with my eye." For the next few days, Clara's steps became quieter. She moved through the shop like a woman balancing water in a basket, calm but dangerously fragile. The apprentices noticed she wasn't humming as she stirred anymore. The way she stared at her pots sometimes, you'd think she was hearing voices from inside them. Her laugh was there, but it now came with pauses, as though her mind was rehearsing something else entirely. At home, she continued the charade of illness, now with exaggerated coughs and constant yawns. She bathed in candlelight and slept in wrappers even on hot nights, all in a bid to stay physically distant from Toby. He never pressed. On the contrary, he seemed content with the space. Most nights, he came home late, sometimes not at all. He had started locking his phone with a pattern. Clara watched all these things without blinking, like someone watching a rat dig its own grave. She stopped cooking for him, using the excuse of her medication diet. He grunted but never protested. She took note of everything: the time he left, the smell of his shirts, the way he'd whistle while changing clothes, as if the world outside gave him peace that home didn't. Clara stayed composed, not because she wasn't breaking inside, but because now she needed proof. She needed to catch him, not just for her own closure, but because betrayal had to wear a face. She wouldn't just walk away on suspicion. She wanted the moment to haunt him long after her absence. It was Yumi's message that finally split the silence. A simple text: "He's here. Room 204. Clara read it twice, her fingers curling slightly as she placed her phone on the stool. She didn't rush. She tied her scarf in slow motion, changed into a plain green gown, and put on her lowest slippers. She walked past her shop assistants without saying much, telling one of them to handle the yam porridge and another to mind the stew. Then she left. When she arrived at Malugo Hotel, Yemi was waiting at the back gate. He didn't speak, just nodded and led her through a narrow corridor used by staff. Room 204 was upstairs, second door on the left. Her heart didn't race. It thudded with quiet purpose. The corridor smelled like air freshener and secrets. When they reached the door, she took a deep breath and turned the knob. It wasn't locked. It opened like a sin waiting to be seen. Toby was shirtless on the bed, his chest rising and falling in surprise. The girl beside him squealed and pulled the duvet over her thighs. Clara stood at the doorway, neither blinking nor shaking. She just looked. Toby tried to speak, but nothing useful came out. "Clara," he mumbled. She didn't move. Her eyes scanned the room, the half-eaten pizza on the side table, the girl's wig tossed on the floor, the pink bra hanging on the chair. It was all there. The shame, the confirmation, the filth. She turned around slowly and walked out, Yemi following behind. She didn't look back. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She simply left it all behind: his nakedness, his lies, his confusion. The walk back to her shop was longer than it had ever felt, but Clara didn't miss a step. She didn't stop to greet the women selling vegetables or wave at the bus driver who usually honked twice whenever he passed her. She returned to the shop like a woman who had just buried something. And in a way, she had. That night, she washed her hands with Dettol twice, cleaned her fingernails meticulously, and sat outside staring at nothing. The apprentices had finished serving the last round of beans and fried plantain, but none of them dared disturb her. She sat still for almost an hour, thinking of the years she had spent watering a tree that had already decided not to grow. Inside her chest was not rage. It was something deeper, something colder. She didn't regret catching him. She regretted ever letting herself live in a way that demanded such proof. Later that night, she returned home, undressed quietly, and lay on her side of the bed like always. Toby didn't return until dawn. When he opened the door and found her awake, he paused. She looked at him and said only one thing: "From now, no touch me again." And then she turned to the wall and covered herself like a widow preparing for mourning. Toby didn't speak for 2 days after Clara's quiet sentence that night. Not a word, not a murmur, just the sound of his keys clinking, his slippers scraping the floor, and the television murmuring through silent meals. He began moving like someone who no longer owned the space he was in. He ate fewer meals at home, stayed longer outside, and when he did return, he avoided Clara's eyes like they carried poison. But Clara didn't care to notice anymore. Her silence wasn't a protest, it was a decision. Something in her had shut down, like the last flame of a burnt-out lantern. She went about her duties like a machine programmed to survive. She bathed the children in mornings, packed their lunchboxes, tied her wrapper in a knot, and left before the sun was fully awake. The shop became her haven, her place of control. She no longer stayed behind the fire alone. She trained her girls to cook the stews while she handled supplies, schedules, and customer complaints. She paid rent 2 months in advance and bought a new gas cylinder as backup. Her food was still good, but her spirit had become sharper, more observant. Even the regulars noticed. They said Auntie Clara Day glowed different now, but she only smiled briefly and returned to counting change or wiping a bench. In truth, she wasn't glowing. She was transforming, and like all transformations, it came with pain that didn't scream, only simmered. At home, she cleared out her things slowly. Not the way someone packs in a hurry, but the way a woman moves out emotionally before touching a single box. She started by moving her clothes to the smaller wardrobe. Then she cleared a separate drawer for her skincare. Her side of the bed became cold, barely slept in. She sometimes lay with the children, using the excuse that her illness was still bothering her. The kids didn't ask many questions. They had already learned that their mother's silence was sacred. Toby tried a few half-hearted gestures, a new packet of suya, a bottle of malt left on the table, casual comments like, "You still dare go shop this early?" But Clara responded with the same lukewarm energy he'd given her for months. No questions, no fight, just routine. It was the quiet that scared him, not loud arguments or dramatic accusations. It was the way Clara washed plates without humming, the way she stopped asking if he'd eaten, the way she no longer flinched when he walked into the room. He started watching her the way she used to watch him, peeking around corners, sniffing her towels, trying to see if there was someone else. But there wasn't. Clara had no one else. She didn't even want anyone else. She only wanted air, peace, and the slow, steady sound of her life without the weight of someone else's dishonesty hanging on her neck like a padlock. When the divorce papers came, Toby laughed for too long before realizing Clara wasn't joking. She had filed it quietly, with a lawyer introduced to her by one of her suppliers. The letter was served at home while he was still in boxers, yawning and scratching his chest. He looked at the envelope like it was a prank. "Clara, which kind play be this?" he said, holding the paper in both hands like it might dissolve. She didn't answer. She was packing stockfish into a basket, tying it with a rope for the afternoon delivery. When he raised his voice and asked again, she looked up only once and said, "You fit no sign." "But me, I don't sign already." That was the last argument they had. After that, everything slowed down. The children were informed gently. Clara sat them down, explained that Mummy and Daddy wouldn't be living the same way again, but that they would both always be there for them. The older one asked, "Is it because Daddy shouted too much?" And Clara only said, "No, baby. Sometimes two people are not good for each other's peace." Toby didn't beg anymore. He didn't scream or plead. Perhaps he knew that the version of Clara standing before him now wasn't the woman he had cheated on. That woman cried. This one just stared. When the judge granted her full custody, with structured visitation rights for Toby, he nodded with a defeated smile. Clara signed the final document and walked out without a backward glance. She didn't stop for water or small talk. She went straight to the market and bought new aprons for the girls at the shop. The restaurant changed without any announcement. The plastic chairs were replaced with wooden ones. The painted zinc roofing was updated. Clara added a cold drinks section beside the soups, and even began offering local delivery within Yomoba. The shop that used to run from morning to evening now had light bulbs installed, running until late into the night. Her customers increased not just because the food remained excellent, but because people said that woman's strong. She'd carry her own cross and no cry. Some tried to flirt. Others tried to pity her. Clara accepted neither. She wore her strength like perfume, subtle but present. Even Toby noticed. One Saturday, during his visitation, he stood by the side of the shop while the children ate in the corner. He watched Clara laugh genuinely for the first time in months, this time with an elderly man from the local football team who was praising her new ochre blend. Toby didn't approach. He simply leaned on the wall, eyes squinting like someone looking into a light too bright for comfort. He still came for the children, but never stayed long. Clara never rushed him out. She didn't need to. He didn't belong there anymore. The space had healed around his absence, and now it bloomed. The months after the divorce felt like Clara was living in a different body. The freedom was quiet at first, almost suspicious, like a child unsure if the reign was truly over. She had been caged so long in silence and suspicion that even after Toby moved out, she still found herself expecting his footsteps at the gate or his loud cough in the corridor. But they never came. Instead, she began to discover her voice again, not in loud declarations or fierce speeches, but in the way she breathed without fear. The children adjusted faster than she expected. They missed their father, but they also saw that their mother smiled more often, laughed more freely, and no longer sat at the table with a distant look in her eyes. They stopped asking her if Daddy was coming home and started asking if they could help in the shop. Her son began learning how to fry a cara, and her daughter sometimes greeted customers when the other girls were busy. Clara didn't plan it, but the shop became a family again, not built on what was lost, but on what remained. She no longer rushed meals or skipped her own plates. She began to eat better, sleep better, even dream again. At night, she would sit on the veranda and drink zobo while watching the moon, and in those moments, she felt like a woman who had finally taken off her heavy wrapper after a long, hot day. Business, too, began to take new shape. One afternoon, a woman from a radio station came in to eat and left singing praises about the widow jollof she had tasted. She didn't know Clara's story, but something about the seasoning, the way it was both smoky and comforting, stayed with her. Days later, she mentioned it during her show, and curious customers began trickling in. Then a food blogger from a nearby city passed through Umoba and wrote a glowing review about Clara's firewood kitchen, calling it the best hidden treasure south of the river. Clara didn't plan for fame, but it came like rainfall after a long dry spell. She used the sudden rush wisely. She reinvested every profit into expansion. A small storage space was rented beside the shop. She hired 2 new assistants and bought a second deep freezer. Soon, her menu extended beyond the usual. She introduced enquobi on Fridays, grilled tilapia on weekends, and local fruit salad served in calabash bowls. Customers now booked seats in advance. The space that once held 3 benches and a pot now had structure, rhythm, and pride. Clara didn't rush the growth. She let it come, slow and steady, like soup thickening over low fire. Her only rule was that the food must always feel like home, even if home had once been broken. Toby watched it all from a distance. Sometimes he would arrive for the children and meet Clara consulting with suppliers or overseeing food deliveries. She always greeted him politely, but her words never crossed into personal territory. He, on the other hand, had begun to look thinner. The woman he had been seeing, rumor had it they were no longer together. Clara never asked. He stood by the kitchen and said, "You've done well, Clara. I won't lie." She nodded without smiling and continued arranging ingredients. Then he added, "You know, not everything happened the way you think." But she didn't turn around. She said, "Everything I need to know, I lived it." And that ended the conversation. He left quietly. It was the first time he walked away without waiting for a response. Clara didn't carry bitterness toward him. What she carried now was clarity. She had once believed love was about endurance, about carrying each other's burdens, even when one person chose to make theirs heavier. But now she understood differently. Love was not supposed to wound. And healing didn't mean dragging the person who hurt you back into your arms. It meant learning to hold yourself better. One afternoon, as the sun began to lean toward the horizon, Clara sat at the far end of her shop with a notepad. She was sketching out an idea for a second location. A new space had opened on the other side of Umoba near the taxi park, and she was considering expanding. It scared her, but not in the way that paralyzed, more like the kind of fear that pushed you to do more. A few customers were eating in front, and her apprentices were laughing as they chopped vegetables. The radio was playing a highlife song from years past, and the smell of catfish stew filled the air. Clara looked around and realized this was the first time in years that her life felt full, without pretense, without pretending, without pain. She whispered a short prayer of gratitude under her breath, not loud, just enough for her own heart to hear. She had walked through fire and come out with flavor. Her story had not ended in heartbreak. It had found another beginning, slow and tender like pepper soup on a rainy day. The past no longer had power. The shame, the suspicion, the betrayal, they had burned, and what remained was something whole. Something beautiful. Something hers. The second branch of Clara's firewood kitchen opened with little fanfare but much anticipation. It stood on a busy street close to the taxi park, nestled between a barber shop and a boutique, with a wide frontage painted in soft yellow and green. The locals had watched the renovations for weeks, whispering among themselves about whether Clara would truly pull it off. When the first pot of bunga soup hit the fire, the smell alone summoned customers. Drivers parked haphazardly just to get a plate before their next trip, while market women ordered in bulk and sent their children to collect their takeaways. Clara didn't hire a manager. She oversaw the operations herself. Each morning, she visited the new shop after checking the original one, ensuring the soups were balanced and the rice was neither too soft nor undercooked. Her presence became part of the appeal. She didn't hide in an office or act unreachable. She moved through the kitchens, corrected errors with grace, and praised good efforts with genuine warmth. Customers loved that she knew their names, even their favorite meals, and when she wasn't around, her staff mimicked her values, because they had seen how her quiet discipline built something from ashes. The new branch became a symbol in the town, a reminder that life could be rebuilt, not through noise or pity, but through consistent hands and a resilient heart. Clara's days became longer, but not in a way that drained her. She woke early to prepare the children for school, checked both restaurants, and sometimes even went to the local food markets herself, insisting on hand-picking certain ingredients. Her evenings were spent in ledgers and notebooks, learning to understand profits and projections, while her weekends included teaching the younger girls how to cook with firewood without letting the smoke overtake the taste. Yet, in all of this, she found time to breathe. On Sunday evenings, she took long walks to the riverbank near the edge of town. It wasn't a fancy place, just grass, mud, and slow water, but it calmed her. She would sit on a wooden bench, watching the ripples, letting the stillness fill the gaps left by old wounds. Sometimes her children joined her. They would pick stones, chase dragonflies, or ask curious questions about the food business. Clara always answered with patience, using simple words to explain deep truths. They had seen her sadness, yes, but now they were seeing her strength, and it shaped them. Her son once told her, "Mummy, I want to open my own shop too." She smiled and said, "Start with learning how to sweep well. A clean place is the first sign of good food." That was how she parented, through examples, not lectures. She no longer thought much about Toby, not because the memories had vanished, but because they no longer stung. Occasionally, he would still come around to pick up the children, now with more awkwardness than arrogance. He had moved into a rented apartment not far from the outskirts of Umoba and worked a night job at a private security firm. He looked older, less sure of himself, often subdued. Clara remained cordial, never unkind, but never too familiar. If he complimented her work or tried to ask questions about her progress, she responded with the kind of polite detachment that left no room for misunderstanding. The children still loved him, and she encouraged that. She never spoke ill of him in front of them. She understood that bitterness passed through words like fire through dry leaves, and she didn't want to plant that in her children's hearts. They would grow up and form their own opinions. Her responsibility was to give them balance, not bias. Occasionally, people gossiped about how she'd become successful after her husband left, suggesting that maybe she was lucky or had gotten help from someone powerful. Clara never responded to those rumors. She understood that success always attracted questions, and not all questions deserved answers. The only people she owed anything to were the ones she fed, whether with food or with the story of her life. One afternoon, as rain whispered against the zinc roof of her original shop, Clara sat under the shaded porch peeling yam with her daughter. It was a quiet day, and she welcomed the slowness. A young girl from the university nearby came over to interview her for a school project. She was nervous, holding a small notebook and fumbling with her pen. "Ma, I've heard about you everywhere," the girl began. "People say your story is strong. I want to ask, if you could go back, would you change anything?" Clara paused, her knife midair, and looked at the girl. Her eyes were neither sad nor proud, just calm. "If I could go back," she said, "maybe I'd speak up earlier. Maybe I'd leave before I broke in places I didn't need to." But would I change everything? No. My pain gave me wisdom. My silence taught me to listen. And my heartbreak taught me to cook food that heals. The girl blinked, unsure how to respond, and Clara smiled softly before returning to the yam. The fire cracked behind her. A new customer walked in. Life, she had learned, doesn't pause for anyone. But when you finally stop running from it, it serves you sweet, like ripe plantain fried with care. Sometimes love teaches you to stay, but wisdom teaches you when to leave. In a world where loyalty is often mistaken for silence, never forget that peace is a seed only you can plant within yourself. Clara's journey wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about rediscovering her voice in a life that once tried to silence her. If you're in a space where your joy is constantly questioned, where your loyalty is abused, or where your efforts are met with suspicion instead of support, take a moment to ask yourself, is this still love or just survival? You owe no one your light if they keep trying to dim it. Protect your peace, no matter how familiar the chaos may feel. Growth might be painful, but staying small for the comfort of others will slowly kill your spirit. Choose you, every single time. May the same God who turned ashes into oil of gladness in Clara's life turn every betrayal in your journey into a blessing you never saw coming. May your tears become testimonies, your silence become strategy, and your heartbreaks become highways to destiny. May your home, your hands, and your heart never run dry. I declare over your life, may peace enter like a river, may clarity come like morning light, and may every wrong turn be redirected by grace. From this day, may you walk with your head high and your spirit light, knowing that you are not a victim of love gone sour, but a vessel of strength reborn. If you receive it, shout a joyful amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.